Assalamu alaikum everyone. In this video lecture, we will be discussing two difficult theory questions from breathing and respiration, which is a topic of O-level biology 5090. Let's start. The diagram shows apparatus used to study breathing. So guys, this is the apparatus that is used to study breathing. If we analyze this apparatus, so there's a tube which is connected to a mouthpiece, right? And mouthpiece is into the person's mouth, through which the person is breathing in air and breathing out air. What is meant by this is that when the person breathes in, the air goes into the person's lungs and the air goes out of this tube, right? And when the person breathes out, the air goes out of the person's lungs and out of the person's mouth into this tube, right? So what happens is that when a person is breathing in or taking air into his or her lungs, the air flows out of this tube. Okay, so when the air is flowing out of this tube, the air is actually coming from the upper box. We can see that upper box contains what? Upper box contains air. What happens is that when a person is breathing in, the air is actually going from this upper box into this tube, and then the air moves along this tube, and then the air comes out of this tube and into the person's mouth, right? So when the person is breathing in, the air is moving like this as shown. So what will happen if a person is breathing in? Obviously, the air in the upper box will decrease, and we can say that kind of the upper box will collapse, or we can say that the upper box which contains air, it will kind of fall, right? And this pen will go downward, right? Okay. When the person breathes out, so what happens is that the air is coming out of the person's mouth and going into this tube. When the air goes into this tube, it goes like this into this tube, and then it goes into the upper box containing air. So upper box will rise and this pen will also rise. So the graph will go upwards. So kind of when the graph is going downwards, it means the person is breathing in. When it's going upwards, it means the person is breathing out. So this is breathing in, breathing out, breathing in, breathing out. I hope you get this. Okay, let's discuss the questions. A part 1, describe what will happen to the upper box containing air as a person takes one breath in from the apparatus. So guys, if the person takes in one breath from the apparatus, this means that the air will be flowing out of this tube, and when the air flows out of this tube, obviously the air is coming from the upper box, right? And going into this chamber, and then from this chamber into this tube. So actually, when the person takes one breath in from this apparatus, so what will happen to the upper box? We can say that the upper box will fall. It falls, or we can say it collapses, right? Okay, state the percentage of oxygen in the atmospheric air. So guys, we know that the percentage of oxygen in the atmospheric air is 21.0%. Explain how the percentage of oxygen in the air in the upper box will change as a person breathes in and out through the apparatus several times. So guys, they're saying that if a person is breathing in and out through the apparatus several times, what will happen to the percentage of oxygen? Obviously, when the person breathes in, so the person when inhales air, you know that person takes up oxygen from the air. You know about the gas exchange. Whenever we breathe in air, so some of the oxygen from that air goes into our blood, and that is used in aerobic respiration. So obviously, when the person is breathing in and out, and basically the person that breathes in is actually breathing the air in this box, and then the person is then exhaling that air, which has now little oxygen as compared to the air that the person was breathing in. For example, when the person is breathing in the air, when the person was breathing air the first time, it contained 21% oxygen. Then when the person exhaled the air, it contained 16% oxygen. The next time the person was breathing how much oxygen? 16% oxygen. And for example, this time the person was exhaling even less oxygen than this, maybe for example 12%. So what do we observe is that when the person breathes in and breathes out through this apparatus for some time, the oxygen concentration will the in the upper box will decrease. So explain how the percentage of oxygen in the air in the upper box will change as the person breathes in and out through the apparatus several times. Obviously, we will write over here that the percentage of oxygen will fall, the percentage of oxygen will decrease in this air. And what is the reason? Because we need to explain. So what is the reason behind this? We will simply say the oxygen diffuses into the blood of the person as he or she breathes in air. And why the oxygen has to diffuse into the blood? Because the person has to use this oxygen in aerobic respiration. The oxygen is used in aerobic respiration. Okay. Substance M is present in the apparatus to absorb an excretory product from expired air. Name this excretory product. So guys, you all know that the excretory product that is excreted in the expired air is carbon dioxide, right? So when the person is breathing out, what happens? The air goes into the tube, and this air contains what? Carbon dioxide. So this carbon dioxide is absorbed by this substance M before the air goes into the box, right? So we all know that the excretory product that is found in the expired air is carbon dioxide. So why are they absorbing carbon dioxide? So that when the person breathes in again, the air does not contain a lot of carbon dioxide. I'm repeating this point again. For example, when the person breathes in, so the air is high in oxygen and low in CO2, obviously. And when the person breathes out, what happens? When the person breathes out, obviously there is high carbon dioxide and low oxygen. So what happens is that this substance M absorbs carbon dioxide, it eliminates carbon dioxide, so that when the air it goes to the box, the air contains mainly oxygen. So that the person when breathes in again through this apparatus, so the person breathes in air containing high oxygen and low CO2. I hope you get this point. Okay. Part B. The diagram shows a chart recorded by the pen on the revolving drum. So guys, this is the chart which is recorded from the pen on the revolving drum, as I discussed earlier. So we all know that if the pen is falling down, or we can say if the graph is falling down, so what it means that the person is breathing in. So this is breathing out, this is breathing in, right? You can recall from the pen over here that when the person breathes in, what happens? The air in the box decreases, the volume of the air in the box decreases, and the pen goes down. So the graph goes down, right? And obviously when the person is breathing out, the air is coming into the box and the pen rises and the graph goes up. So guys, when you can see a fall in the graph, whenever the graph is falling, it means the person is breathing in, and whenever the graph rises, the person is breathing out. Okay. Explain how the action of one named muscle caused the part of the chart labeled N. So guys, if we look at N, the graph is falling. This means that the person is breathing in. We have to name one named muscle and its action, that how it causes the fall in this graph, right? We have to explain for the part labeled N. So when we breathe in, which muscles are actually contracting? The diaphragm and the external intercostal muscles. So we can over here write that the diaphragm or external, because we have to state how the action of one named muscle causes the part labeled N. So we can either write the diaphragm contracts or the external intercostal muscles contract. In reality, both contract, but we have to name any one muscle, right? So the diaphragm or external intercostal muscles contract, right? Okay, what will happen then? This causes the pressure in the lungs decreases. We all know that when the diaphragm or external intercostal muscles they contract, what happens? The chest expands, the thorax expands, right? We can also write that the thorax or chest cavity expands, and when it expands, the pressure in the lungs decreases. So the air flows into the lungs, and when the air flows into the lungs, what is happening? As the air flows into the lungs, air volume decreases in the upper box. Over here we can see that when the person is breathing in, the air is actually moving into the person's lungs, right? And the air in the upper box decreases, which causes the pen to move down, right? The pen moves down. Okay. Part 2. A second chart was recorded for a period of 1 minute by the same person after vigorous exercise. State how an increased rate of breathing after exercise would be shown on this second chart. So guys, now the person is having vigorous exercise. They are asking that how on this chart we can show increased rate of breathing. We all know that when a person exercises, the breathing rate increases, which means that there are more breaths in 1 minute, right? Over here, the graph shows 60 seconds, and how many breaths are there? Over here, there are 1 breath, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So kind of there are 10 waves, or we can say 10 breaths in 60 seconds. So obviously when the person is exercising, these waves will increase in number. This shows increased rate of breathing, right? I hope you get this. So whenever there is increased rate of breathing, the person is taking more breaths in 1 minute or in 60 seconds. So what do we observe actually? The waves are now closer, or we can say there's increased frequency of waves. So what we will write over here? State how an increased rate of breathing after exercise would be shown on this second chart. So we will simply write closer waves or increased frequency of waves. Increased frequency of waves. So guys, we are done with this question. We will now move on to the next question. Cardiopulmonary resuscitation or CPR is a first aid procedure. Air is forced into a patient's lungs by another person. The heart is made to pump blood by repeated compression of the patient's chest over the heart. A person performing CPR on a patient is shown in the diagrams. So guys, what is CPR? CPR is known as cardiopulmonary resuscitation, and this is a procedure in first aid, right? So for example, if the patient had an accident and the patient is unconscious, or if the patient had an electric shock, or due to any reason, if the patient falls and is unconscious, and we suspect that the patient is not breathing or the heart of the patient is not working, so we can carry out CPR to restart the heart and to keep the patient breathing, right? Okay. So, what happens in CPR is that the air is forced into the lungs of the patient by a person. So, you can see that a person is blowing air into the patient's mouth, and this air is forced into the patient's lungs. So, guys, the air is blown into the patient, or we can say the air is forced into the lung. The air is forced into the lungs of the patient so that this air can go into the lungs, and the gas exchange continues because the person is unable to breathe, right? And when we force air into the patient's lung, gas exchange still occurs and the patient does not die. Moreover, what is the purpose of repeated compressions of the chest? Chest compression, what it does, that it causes the heart to pump blood, and if a heart is not working in such a way that what happens, that sometimes after an accident or due to some electric shock, heart is just vibrating and it's not actually beating. So when we give compressions, it kind of restarts the heart and the heart starts beating, right? Let's discuss the questions. A part 1. State what will be seen to happen to the patient's chest when the air is forced into the lungs. So guys, when the air is being forced into the patient's lungs, obviously the patient's chest will expand. So we will simply write that it will expand. All right. Okay. Name in the correct order the tubes through which the air travels from the patient's mouth to the alveoli of the lungs. Obviously, when the air is blown into the patient's mouth, the air will enter the throat, and from the throat it will enter the larynx, and then from the larynx it will move into the trachea, and from the trachea it will move into the bronchi, and from the bronchi to the bronchioles, and from bronchioles to alveoli, right? So we have to mention any three words over here. Name in the correct order the tubes through which the air will travel from the patient's mouth to the alveoli of the lungs. So what we will write, we will start from maybe trachea. We have to write the correct order. We can also start from larynx, but it's better to start from trachea because we just have three boxes. Or we can write larynx instead of trachea. We can also do that. Moreover, after trachea there are bronchi, right? And from the bronchi the air goes into the bronchioles, right? So this is how the air is flowing, and from the bronchioles obviously it will travel to the alveoli, right? Part 3. The air forced into the patient's lungs has different concentrations of gases compared to the air the patient would normally breathe in. State two differences in the concentration of gases. So guys, normally the air that we breathe in comes from the atmosphere, and atmosphere has a higher concentration of oxygen. Basically, atmospheric oxygen concentration is 21%, and atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration is 0.04%. Over here, the patient is not breathing the normal air. Instead, the air is blown into the patient's lungs by another person who kind of is exhaling the air. I hope you understand this. So this person is basically exhaling the air, and the air that the person is exhaling has lower oxygen concentration, that is 16%, and higher carbon dioxide concentration, that is 4.0%, right? So over here, the air that enters the patient's lungs is kind of exhaled air from another person. It's not the air that the patient is breathing from the atmosphere. So obviously, we have to write the two differences in the concentration of gases, where the differences should be in the air that is blown into the patient's lung and the air that the patient would normally breathe in. Okay. So what are the two differences? The first difference is that oxygen concentration is low. Oxygen concentration is lower in the air forced into the lungs, into the lungs of the patient, and carbon dioxide concentration is higher. Carbon dioxide concentration is higher in the air forced into the lungs of the patient. All right. Explain how each action of the CPR or cardiopulmonary resuscitation procedure will benefit the patient. Air forced into the patient's lungs. So, as I told you, that air is forced into the patient's lungs so that gas exchange can continue, right? So, the forcing of air into the patient's lungs, why does it benefit the patient? Because the gas exchange will continue. So, simply we will write that the air is forced into the patient's lungs, and this has a benefit such as the delivery of oxygen to the alveoli. So we can write that oxygen is delivered to alveoli, right? From alveoli, oxygen diffuses into the blood. Oxygen diffuses into the blood from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration, right? We can write this. Repeated compression of the patient's chest. Okay, so how repeated compressions of the patient's chest benefit the patient? Obviously, we can simply say that from the left ventricle, by compression, what happens is that blood from the left ventricle is pumped into the aorta, which supplies the blood to all the tissues of the body. Moreover, we can also write that repeated compressions can restart the heart. Repeated compressions, in case if the heart is just vibrating and not beating, so repeated compressions can restart the heart. The heart can start beating. All right, so we are done with this question. Thank you so much for watching. Allah Hafiz.